Lost in the beast's domain. Surviving the jungle's darkest secrets. An adventure horror story. The jungle stretched endlessly before them, its thick canopy casting long shadows across the ground. Lena squinted at the map in her hands, tracing their route with her finger, trying to reassure herself they weren't lost yet. Around her, the others joked and laughed, excited for the adventure ahead. Max, their unofficial leader, was out front. He had his machete out, hacking away at the overgrown vines that blocked their path. "We're getting close to the research site," he called back to the group. "Just another hour, maybe less." Ethan grinned, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I hope we see something wild like a jaguar or something. You know, real jungle vibes." "Yeah, because getting mauled by a big cat sounds like a fantastic idea," Sophie shot back, rolling her eyes. She and Lena had been best friends since high school, and Sophie had the same sense of adventure, though she was more cautious about it. "Let's just stick to the plan and not go chasing danger, okay? Where's the fun in that?" Leo chimed in from the back, cracking a joke to keep the mood light. His jokes usually worked, but Lena felt a twinge of unease creeping into her mind. The jungle seemed too quiet, too still. The birds weren't chirping like they had been when they first arrived, and the air seemed heavier, the shadows deeper. As they walked further, the air grew thick with humidity, and the jungle closed in around them. The path narrowed, and the trees seemed to grow taller, more imposing. Lena looked up, barely able to see the sky through the dense tangle of branches and leaves. "This place is unreal," Ben said, his camera out, recording every inch of the jungle. He was documenting their journey for a research project, focusing on the wildlife. "I've never seen so many species of plants in one place. It's like stepping into another world," Grace added, adjusting her backpack. Always the calm and logical one, she had made sure everyone had the necessary supplies, especially after hearing the stories about how dangerous the jungle could be. Nina, ever the fitness fanatic, was at the front with Max. She moved with the ease of someone who was used to trekking through difficult terrain. "We're making good time," she said, her voice steady. "Let's keep up the pace." But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She glanced at the map again, frowning. "Max, are you sure we're on the right track?" Max paused, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, we're fine. Don't worry, Lena. We're almost there." Lena didn't feel reassured. The jungle seemed alive with unseen eyes watching them from every shadow, every rustling bush. But she kept her thoughts to herself, not wanting to ruin the excitement for the others. They pressed on deeper into the jungle. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the crunch of their boots on the undergrowth. Lena couldn't help but notice how quiet it had become. And then it happened. A distant, guttural growl echoed through the trees, low and menacing. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. Max tightened his grip on the machete. "Could be anything. Let's keep moving." But the growl came again, louder this time, closer. The group exchanged nervous glances. "Maybe we should head back," Grace suggested, her calm demeanor slipping for the first time. Ethan shook his head, grinning. "No way. This is what we came for. Let's see what's out there." But as they moved forward, the jungle seemed to close in around them, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. The growls faded into the distance, but the tension in the group remained. They continued walking in uneasy silence, the thrill of adventure quickly giving way to the creeping anxiety of the unknown. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, every crunch of a branch underfoot making her jump. Even Ethan, who had been all bravado moments earlier, was now quieter, his eyes darting nervously around. "Maybe we should just set up camp for the night," Ben suggested, breaking the silence. "We've been walking for hours. It's getting late." Max checked his watch and nodded. "All right, let's find a clearing. We'll rest and tomorrow we'll reach the site. No need to push ourselves in the dark." They found a small clearing surrounded by towering trees, and as they set up camp, the unsettling quiet of the jungle continued. Lena and Sophie set up their tent, with Lena still feeling on edge. "Do you think we're being paranoid?" Sophie asked, trying to shake off the lingering fear. "I don't know," Lena replied. "But something doesn't feel right. This place feels alive, but not in a good way." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the jungle became even more oppressive. The deepening darkness seemed to swallow the light from their lanterns, and the usual nighttime sounds, chirping insects, the occasional hoot of an owl, were eerily absent. They gathered around a small fire, eating in silence. Leo tried cracking a few jokes, but no one laughed. Suddenly, a loud rustle came from the bushes nearby. Everyone froze, their eyes snapping toward the sound. "Probably just an animal," Max said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. But then, out of the darkness, a shadow moved. A pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared, low to the ground, staring at them from the underbrush. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the group. Max stood slowly, gripping his machete, while Nina pulled out a hunting knife she'd brought along just in case. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the creature lunged. It was a blur of fur and fangs, too fast to fully comprehend. The group scattered, yelling in panic. The creature, a massive hulking beast, had Max in its jaws before he could react. His scream pierced the night as it dragged him into the jungle, the underbrush rustling violently as they disappeared. Lena's heart raced, terror surging through her veins. "We have to go," she yelled, grabbing Sophie's arm. But they were frozen, paralyzed by fear, watching as the creature's eyes appeared again, this time closer. The shock of Max's sudden death left the group paralyzed. His screams still echoed in their minds as they stood there, staring into the darkness where he had been dragged. The jungle, once filled with their excitement and chatter, now loomed as a death trap. No one knew what to say, no one knew what to do. The fire flickered weakly, casting long shadows on their terrified faces. "We need to move," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't stay here." Ethan, usually the one to jump into danger headfirst, was wide-eyed and shaking. "What was that thing?" he muttered, almost to himself. "That wasn't any animal I've ever seen." "It doesn't matter what it was," Nina snapped, her knife still in her hand, knuckles white. "It's coming for us next if we don't move." Grace, ever the voice of reason, took a deep breath. "We need to stick together. Running off in separate directions will only make us easier targets." Ben fumbled with his camera, which had caught nothing but blurred darkness. "We should try to get back to the main path, if we can retrace our steps." But Lena knew. Deep down she knew they were lost. The jungle was a maze, and whatever path they thought they had been following was now hidden beneath layers of thick vines and vegetation. They were trapped, and the beast was hunting them. "Max knew the way," Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He had the map." Lena grabbed Sophie by the shoulders, shaking her slightly. "We're not giving up, okay? We'll find a way out, but we have to keep moving. Now." With Max gone, the group fell into chaos. Fear had taken root, and every crack of a twig, every whisper of whine through the trees sent them into a frenzy. Ethan's bravado had vanished, replaced by wide-eyed terror. Nina, normally the strongest and most level-headed, had her knife in hand at all times, her eyes darting at every shadow. "We need to head back to where we entered," Ben said, checking the compass on his phone. "We should be able to find our way if we stay calm." But staying calm was easier said than done. As they started walking, the jungle seemed to close in around them. Vines and branches tugged at their clothes, the thick underbrush making every step an effort. And the feeling of being watched, of something following them, grew stronger with every moment. The hours dragged on, and exhaustion began to set in. The oppressive heat, the constant buzzing of insects, and the ever-present fear wore them down. Lena glanced at the others. They were all struggling mentally and physically. Sophie was barely holding it together, her hands trembling, while Ethan seemed to be losing his mind, constantly looking over his shoulder. They walked in silence, each one lost in their own thoughts. But that silence was soon broken by the unmistakable sound of something moving through the jungle behind them. A low growl. Everyone stopped, hearts pounding. Lena turned slowly, dread filling her as the rustling grew louder. The underbrush trembled as something massive, moved toward them. "It's back," Nina whispered, her voice barely audible. Without warning, the creature burst through the foliage, its eyes glowing with the same menacing yellow. It was enormous, covered in thick fur, with razor-sharp claws and fangs that gleamed in the moonlight. The beast let out a bone-chilling roar, its eyes locking onto the group. "Run!" Lena screamed, grabbing Sophie's hand and sprinting into the jungle. They scattered, desperation driving them in different directions as the beast charged. Lena could hear the crashing of branches behind her, the sound of the creature pursuing them, and Sophie's panicked breaths as they ran deeper into the jungle. "Don't stop," Lena urged, pulling Sophie along as they dodged trees and leaped over roots. The jungle was a blur around them, the thick canopy overhead making it hard to see. But they didn't stop, couldn't stop. Not with that thing behind them. Lena glanced back once, just in time to see Ethan stumble, his foot catching on a vine. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air as the creature loomed over him. "Ethan, get up!" Lena screamed, but it was too late. The beast pounced, its jaws clamping down on Ethan's leg, dragging him into the bushes. His screams echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down Lena's spine. But they couldn't stop. They had to keep going. The jungle seemed to stretch on forever, an endless labyrinth of trees and vines that twisted and turned in every direction. Lena and Sophie ran until their legs burned, their lungs screaming for air. They had no idea where the others were, whether they had survived the attack or fallen prey to the beast like Max and Ethan. They stumbled upon a small clearing, the moonlight filtering through the trees just enough to give them a view of their surroundings. Lena collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, while Sophie leaned against a tree, tears streaming down her face. "We can't keep doing this," Sophie sobbed. "We're going to die out here." Lena's mind raced, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and desperation. "No, we're not going to die. We just need to find the others. We need a plan." Sophie shook her head. "What plan? That thing is faster, stronger. It's hunting us." Lena swallowed hard. She knew Sophie was right. The beast was unlike anything they had ever seen, and it was relentless. But there had to be a way out. There had to be. The sound of rustling nearby snapped them both back to attention. Lena held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears. Was it the others? Or was it the beast? A figure emerged from the trees. Ben. He looked disheveled, his clothes torn and dirt smeared across his face, but he was alive. "Thank God," Lena breathed, rushing over to him. "Are you okay? Where are the others?" Ben shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. I lost sight of everyone when we scattered. But I think I saw where the beast came from. There's some kind of cave nearby. I don't know what's inside, but it might be where it's hiding." Lena's stomach churned at the thought. A cave. The beast's lair. The last place they should be going. "We need to get out of this jungle, not get closer to it," Sophie argued, her voice trembling. "Why would we go to its lair?" "Because," Ben said, his voice steady, "it might be the only way to stop it." Lena hesitated. The idea of facing the creature head-on was terrifying, but at this point they had no other options. They couldn't keep running. Eventually they would tire, and the beast would find them. "Show us where," Lena said, her voice firmer than she felt. Ben nodded and led the way through the dense undergrowth. Every step felt heavier as they neared the cave. The jungle seemed even more oppressive now, the air thick with tension. When they finally reached the cave's entrance, Lena felt her heart sink. It was massive, a gaping maw in the side of a rocky hill, shrouded in vines and darkness. A faint, foul odor wafted from within, making her stomach churn. "This is it," Ben whispered. "This is where it came from." Lena stared into the darkness, her hands trembling. If they went inside, there was no guarantee they'd come out. but if they stayed out here, the beast would continue to hunt them. "We have to do this," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Ben nodded, but Sophie looked terrified, her hands shaking. "Lena, I can't go in there." Lena squeezed her hand. "We have no choice." The cave's gaping entrance felt like a portal to another world, one filled with dread, death, and the unknown. The foul stench wafting from within caused Lena's stomach to churn, but she steeled herself. This was their only chance, no matter how slim. "Stay close," Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. He took the lead, a small flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. Lena and Sophie followed, their footsteps quiet, but their heartbeats deafening in the silence. Each step felt like they were descending deeper into a nightmare, their surroundings shifting from dense jungle to cold, jagged stone. The further they walked, the more the jungle's cacophony faded, replaced by an eerie, unsettling quiet. The cave was far more expansive than they'd expected, with twisting tunnels that branched off into the unknown. Shadows danced on the walls, distorted by the flickering beam of Ben's flashlight. The air grew colder, thick with moisture and the heavy smell of decay. "What is this place?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "How far does it go?" Ben didn't respond. His face was pale, jaw clenched. He didn't know, and neither did Lena. The oppressive darkness and the beast lurking within made it feel like the walls were closing in on them. A sudden clattering noise echoed through the cave, causing them all to freeze. Lena's heart leapt into her throat, and she whipped around to see what it was. The noise came from deeper inside, a rhythmic scraping sound like claws on stone. "It's close," Ben whispered, his grip tightening on the flashlight. They had two choices: continue forward into the lair of the creature, or turn back to the jungle where it could easily stalk them. Neither option offered much hope, but they had come this far. Lena took a deep breath and stepped forward, urging the others to follow. The path narrowed, forcing them to crouch as they navigated the jagged rocks. As they pressed deeper into the cave, Lena noticed strange markings on the walls, claw marks, deep and erratic, as though something had scratched its way through. The beast's presence was everywhere, lingering like a ghost. Suddenly Ben stopped, holding up a hand. Lena moved beside him, her eyes straining in the dim light. Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a massive cavern. The walls were lined with bones, animals, and some that looked unmistakably human. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she realized what they had walked into. "This is where it feeds," Ben murmured, his voice filled with horror. The cavern was littered with skeletal remains, piled haphazardly across the floor. The sheer number of bones made it clear that the beast had been hunting for a long time. Lena shuddered, her legs feeling weak. Sophie gasped, covering her mouth. "We shouldn't be here." Before anyone could respond, a low growl rumbled through the cavern, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Lena spun around, her heart hammering as the shadows seemed to shift. From the far end of the cavern, the beast emerged. It was even larger than Lena had remembered, its hulking form barely visible in the low light, but its glowing yellow eyes locked onto them. Its fur was matted, and its massive claws scraped the ground as it advanced. Ben fumbled with his backpack, pulling out a flare. "Run!" he yelled, lighting the flare and tossing it toward the beast. The flare exploded in a burst of red light, momentarily blinding the creature. It let out a deafening roar, shaking the walls of the cave. Lena grabbed Sophie's hand, pulling her away as they bolted toward one of the side tunnels. "We have to get out," Sophie cried, stumbling over the uneven ground. But the tunnels twisted and turned, a maze within the cave, and the beast's roar echoed from behind, growing louder with each step. Lena's mind raced as she tried to recall the path they had taken to enter, but it all blurred together in the darkness. There was no way out. Ben sprinted ahead, flashlight flickering, his breath ragged. "Keep moving. Don't stop." But the beast was faster, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Lena could hear its heavy footsteps, the scraping of claws against stone. Panic gripped her chest like a vice. Suddenly, Ben veered off to the right, leading them down a narrow tunnel. It was so tight that they had to squeeze through, but it offered temporary safety from the beast's massive frame. They pushed through the tunnel, the beast's roars echoing behind them. As they emerged into another chamber, Lena's legs were shaking with exhaustion. She looked at Ben and Sophie. They were both terrified but alive. For now. We can't keep running like this, Ben panted, leaning against the cave wall. There's got to be another way out. Sophie was trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. It's going to kill us. We can't outrun it forever. Lena felt the weight of Sophie's words. She wanted to offer comfort, but the truth was undeniable. The beast was relentless and they were running out of options. Ben knelt down, rummaging through his backpack. We have one shot. I brought some explosives. I was planning to use them for research, but maybe we can trap it, collapse the cave on top of it. Lena stared at him, stunned. You're saying we have to blow up the cave? Ben nodded, his hands shaking as he pulled out the small sticks of dynamite. If we can lure it into the main chamber and detonate these, we might have a chance. Otherwise. He didn't need to finish. They all knew the alternative. Lena took a deep breath, her mind racing. Okay, but we'll need to time it perfectly. Sophie wiped her tears, her voice shaky but determined. What do? We need to get back to the main chamber where the bones are, Ben explained. That's where it will follow us. Once it's there, we'll set the explosives and then we run like hell. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all they had left. With renewed focus, the three of them made their way back through the tunnels, their pace quick but cautious. The beast's distant growls echoed through the cave, a constant reminder that time was running out. When they reached the main chamber, Ben quickly set the explosives, planting them near the entrance where the beast would enter. The air was thick with tension as they waited, hiding behind a pile of rocks, their breaths shallow and hearts racing. Moments later, the beast's heavy footsteps reverberated through the cave, growing louder as it approached. Lena's pulse quickened, every muscle in her body tensed. Get ready, Ben whispered, his finger hovering over the detonator. The beast entered the chamber, its massive form illuminated by the faint glow of the flare. It sniffed the air, its glowing eyes scanning the cavern, searching for its prey. Lena held her breath, praying that their plan would work. Now! Ben shouted, pressing the detonator. The explosion rocked the cave, a deafening roar of stone and fire. The walls trembled as rocks came crashing down, engulfing the beast in a cloud of dust and debris. Lena grabbed Sophie's hand and they ran as fast as they could, the sound of the cave collapsing behind them. Lena's lungs burned as she sprinted down the tunnel, Sophie's hand still clenched tightly in hers. Ben was right behind them, his breath ragged and uneven. The explosion reverberated through the cave, the sound of collapsing stone filling the air. Dust choked the narrow passageways as they pushed forward, stumbling over loose rocks and debris. Keep going, Ben yelled from behind them. The cave is coming down. Lena's legs felt like lead, but adrenaline surged through her veins, keeping her moving. The tunnel twisted and turned, and it felt as though the walls were closing in on them. The ground beneath their feet shook with every step, the aftershocks of the explosion reverberating through the earth. We're almost there, Lena shouted, though she wasn't entirely sure where there was. The darkness seemed endless, but they had to believe that there was an exit. The distant sound of falling rock grew louder, and with it came the horrifying realization that the cave might collapse before they could escape. The beast's enraged roars had been silenced by the explosion, but the threat of being buried alive was no less terrifying. Suddenly the tunnel opened up, and Lena skidded to a stop. They had reached another large cavern, but this one was different. Sunlight streamed in from a jagged crack in the ceiling, illuminating the space with a dim ethereal glow. The opening was high up, but it was their only way out. Ben stumbled forward, gasping for air. There. We have to climb. Lena's heart sank as she looked at the steep rock walls leading up to the crack. It was at least 20 feet above them and the rocks looked unstable. But there was no other choice. "Come on," she urged Sophie, who was visibly shaking but nodded in determination. They started the ascent, clambering up the uneven rock face. The loose stones shifted beneath their feet, and every movement felt perilous. Lena's fingers ached as she gripped the jagged edges, pulling herself up with every ounce of strength she had left. Ben was right behind her, and Sophie was just below, struggling but pushing forward. The ground trembled again, and Lena heard the unmistakable sound of more rocks collapsing behind them. They didn't have much time. Just as they reached the halfway point, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. Lena's blood ran cold as she looked down. Through the dust and falling debris, the beast emerged from the darkness, its body battered but still terrifyingly alive. The explosion hadn't killed it, only wounded it. "Climb faster," Ben shouted, his voice filled with panic. The beast let out a deafening roar, its yellow eyes locking onto them as it began to charge. Its massive form barreled through the cavern, knocking aside debris in its path, its rage palpable. Lena's hands trembled as she pulled herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. The opening was so close, but the beast was closing in fast. Ben glanced down, his face pale with fear. "It's going to reach us." Just as Lena reached the top of the climb, Sophie screamed. Lena whipped her head around to see Sophie's foot slip, sending her tumbling back a few feet. The beast was nearly upon her. "No!" Lena cried, her heart hammering in her chest. Without thinking, Ben climbed down a few feet, grabbing Sophie's arm and hauling her up with all his strength. The beast roared again, lunging at them, its claws scraping the rock wall just inches below Sophie's dangling legs. "Go, Sophie!" Ben shouted, shoving her upward. Sophie scrambled up the rocks, her face streaked with tears, but her determination unwavering. She reached the top, where Lena grabbed her arm and pulled her to safety. Lena looked down, her heart pounding in her ears. Ben was the last one left, and the beast was almost upon him. "Ben, hurry!" she screamed, extending her hand. Ben reached for her, his fingers just brushing against hers, but the beast lunged, slamming into the wall. The impact sent rocks cascading down, knocking Ben's hand away. The beast snarled, its massive claws swiping at the air as Ben struggled to hold on. But the rocks beneath him shifted, and with a final heart-wrenching cry, Ben lost his grip. "No!" Lena screamed, watching in horror as Ben fell back into the cavern, the beast lunging forward to claim its prey. Lena's vision blurred with tears as she pulled herself up through the narrow opening, Sophie following behind. They crawled out of the cave, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. For a moment, everything was silent. The jungle, the cave, even the wind seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath of the chaos. Sophie sobbed quietly beside Lena, her body shaking with grief and exhaustion. Lena's mind was numb, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Ben was gone. They had survived the beast, but at a terrible cost. Lena stared up at the sky, the sunlight filtering through the canopy above. She had no idea where they were or how they were going to get out of the jungle, but in that moment, all she could do was breathe. "Ben?" Sophie whispered, her voice cracking. Lena reached out, gripping Sophie's hand tightly. "He saved us," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. For a long time they sat there in silence, the enormity of their loss settling in. But as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Lena knew they couldn't stay here. The jungle was still dangerous, and they had to find a way out before nightfall. "We need to move," Lena said, her voice hoarse but resolute. "We can't stay here." Sophie nodded, wiping her tears, though the grief still weighed heavily on her. Together they stood, looking back at the cave one last time. The beast's roars had been silenced, but the memory of its terror would never leave them. With heavy hearts, Lena and Sophie began their journey through the jungle, not knowing what lay ahead, but determined to survive, because that's what Ben would have wanted. As they disappeared into the trees, the jungle seemed to close in around them once more, the shadows growing long and the dangers still lurking. But they had each other and they had hope. And sometimes that was all they needed. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Explore our playlist of adventure horror stories for more gripping narratives. See you in the next story.